Shemai, Yasharallah, Ayahaynawa, Yahweh, Kud, Shemai, Yasharallah, Ayahaynawa, Yahweh, Kud. First and foremost, I have to give all praise and glory to Yahweh, by Hashem El Shai, by Hashem HaKadosh. Yahweh being the true and world he calls God, by Hashem being the name of, and Yahweh Shai being the true and our Lord and Savior, who the world he calls Jesus, and the HaKadosh meaning the Holy Spirit. Much respect to you, brothers and sisters, pushing the work, Lord, true and sincerity, and also may put in bodies and sacrifice, man. So today in this lesson, this edification, basically going over how ultimately judgment is coming onto you Moabites, man. You know, judgment is coming upon you so-called Chinese, etc., man. You know, Cambodians, you saw Cambodians, you know, like you Chinese, all judgment is coming to y'all, man. You know, judgment is coming to y'all, especially the Asian race, man. You know, because ultimately, man, you know, especially in these times, you know, you Moabites are very proud. And ultimately, I got inspiration to do this lesson because, you know, I was in the plantation. I was at the plantation, you know, school. And ultimately, I had this classmate, right? He's a Moabite, right? But ultimately, I could see while he was talking, you know, by the jokes he was making, you know, and the comments that he was making, ultimately, that he was ultimately showing a form of pride, man. You know, due to Moab being Esau's bitch, he think he can get away with a lot of things, man. You know, but at the end of the day, you know, you Moabites are going to receive judgment too. We ain't forget about you Moabites, man. You know, because you Moabites have a lot to pay for. And ultimately, dude, the Moabite I'm talking about, he was just saying a lot of jokes, you know, Black History Month, you know, oh, Black History Month is over for you. And just basically, you know, he was saying, man, that basically through his words, he was basically saying black people are not better than Chinese people, Asian people, right? And like he was basically at first he was like, oh, I have no culture, and I was like, oh, word. I was like, don't you know that a lot of things that the so-called Asians claimed to create it have created are ultimately from Jake, man. You know, the so-called Negroes, man, like martial arts. You know, the Asians did not create it, man. It was a so-called black man that was among, you know, the Chinese Empire at that time that ultimately created Kung Fu and all that, man. You know, and because Moab has a lot to pay for it, man. You know, Moab, you know, you see it's Chinese food. There's a Chinese food place everywhere, man. You know, there's Chinese food everywhere. But what does Moab promote? Moab Moab promotes abominable food, pork fried rice, you know, shrimp, crab, lobster, you know, all that, man. You know, so ultimately he's gonna pay for that, promoting abominations. You know, you walk down the street, Moab sees you, he's gonna give you a dirty look, man. You know, because these Moabites are prideful, man. You know, these Moabites are ultimately these Edomites as bitches, man. You know, so ultimately these people are not gonna go unpunished, man, because as the scriptures have said, thou join hand to hand, thou shall surely not go unpunished, man. You know, so ultimately, man, you know, major judgment is coming to you Moabites, man. You know, due to your pride, man, and ultimately all the abominable acts that you've committed, man. And we can't forget, man, you know, these Moabites put us in slavery too, man. The so-called Negro Latinos and Native Americans. The Moabites, also the Chinese, so-called Asians, ultimately took a part in the Atlantic slave trade too. That's often history that's not taught, but ultimately you have to research and see what I'm talking about, man. Because it wasn't just the Edomites, so-called white man who put us in slavery. You know, he was the main counterpart, but all these other heathen nations did also, man. So ultimately made these other nations, these heathen in general, ultimately gonna get judgment. But Moab, man, Moab is second on the hit list, man, because he's ultimately Esau's bitch, man. You know? And now let's go to the scriptures. Let's go to the book of Isaiah, chapter 16. Go to the book of Isaiah, chapter 16 and verse 6, and it reads, we have heard the pride of Moab. He is very proud, even of his haughtiness and his pride. in his wrath, but his lies shall not be so, man. So ultimately, man, we have heard the pride of Moab. He is very proud. Moab, is very proud, man. In his haughtiness and in his pride and his wrath, man. Moab is like Esau's mini-me, man. Esau's mini, man. Minion. Literally, these Moabites are literally Esau's minions, man. And his lies shall not be so, man. These Moabites, lie about a lot of things too, man. Lie about certain things they created. Moabites, all these heathen nations, they all steal history, man. They all steal culture too, man. It's not just only Esau, but ultimately they don't do it at such a miraculous level as Esau does by stealing heritage and culture. But these Moabites, man, they steal a lot of things, man. From Jake too, man. A lot of history, and a lot of, people, you know. They never tell you that one of the first, black samurais, no, Salak, one of the first samurais was actually a black man, who ultimately was ultimately the general of the Chinese Empire when the Chinese Empire was ultimately on top, man. There was a point of time where the Chinese Empire was ultimately one of the strongest, empire in the world. And ultimately Jake, was the leading general, man. Meaning that Jake has always been, the head at things, man, the best at everything. We have the light, man. We have the salt. We're the salt of the earth, man. We taught all these heathen how to do stuff, man. But ultimately these Moabites, are prideful, man. In verse 7, therefore shall Moab howl for Moab. So ultimately Moab is going to howl for Moab. Moab is not the Chinese. It consists of majority of the Asians, man. The only Asian race that's by themselves, is the Japanese, which are the Ammonites, man. And the Ammonites, are always independent, just like how they are right now, the Japanese. So ultimately, man, the Moabites consist of Cambodians, what else? Vietnamese, what else? I'm thinking of Asian races, man. Like just a lot of like the rest of the Asian races you could think of. But Ammon is the Japanese, man. The Japanese were always independent. But ultimately, Moab shall howl for Moab. Everyone shall howl for the foundation of Kir Harseth shall ye mourn. Surely they are shoken, man. So ultimately, judgment is coming, upon you Moabites, man. Moab, has a lot to pay for. And we're going to go to the scriptures, man. Let's go to the book of Numbers, chapter 21 and verse 29. Numbers 21 and 29. And it reads, woe to thee, Moab. This is in the Old Testament too, for you Old Testament only as Israelites, man. But let's read it, man. Numbers 21 and 29, and it reads, woe to thee. Woe meaning destruction. Moab, thou art undone, O people of Chemosh. He that giveth his sons that escaped and his daughters into captivity unto Shine, the king of of the Amorites, man. So ultimately, man, destruction is coming upon you Moabites, man. And this is in the Old Testament too, man. This is the book of Numbers. This already been predestinated that ultimately judgment is coming to you Moabites. And ultimately y'all as incest babies anyways, man. You find another precept, man, that says the same thing, man, because ultimately it's supposed to be you're supposed to have precept upon precept, line upon line, man. So you're supposed to, have multiple precepts to back up your claim, man. All right. And now let's go to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 48 and 46. Jeremiah 48 and 46, and it reads, woe be unto thee, O Moab, the people of Chemosh, perish, for thy sons are taken into captives, and thy daughters captives, man. So ultimately, man, again, it says, woe unto thee, O Moab, the people of Chemosh, perish, for thy sons are taken as captives, are taken captives, and thy daughters captives, man. So ultimately, you Moabites are going into slavery too, man. In verse 47. Yet I will bring again the captivity of Moab in the latter days, saith the Lord. This far is the judgment of Moab, man. So you Moabites are ultimately, going into slavery, and ultimately will pay for the crimes that you've committed, man. And ultimately partaking in wickedness with Esau. And ultimately, you can't forget, these Moabites also took part in crafty counsel to ultimately take down the Israelites, man. In Psalms 83, the Moabites, ultimately teamed up, with the Edomites and the other nations to ultimately take us down, man. So Moab is not safe, man. Moab is not safe. Moab is basically a reflection, of Esau, man. But just on the left side, because in a reflection, it's the opposite side, man. It rotates to the left. So ultimately that's what Moab is, man. That's what Moab is at the end of the day, man. So massive judgment is coming to Moab for his crimes, man, that he's committed, man. Because Moab is not saved. There's a lot of things that people forget that the Moabites did to us, man. Just because, Esau, Esau's the devil, so even if someone teams up with him, he's still going to do them dirty at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, you Moabites are not safe, man. You Moabites are not safe at the end of the day. You prideful, thinking that, China got next. Hell nah, man. Israel got next, man. And you Moabites, man, y'all disregard your Yahweh Shemel Shai too. Ultimately slander his people, man. When a woman, comes to America, you don't think their fathers tell them to stay away from nigga? Because they know, man. Their fathers and their parents tell them to stay away from niggas, man. And ultimately that's all. You see that hatred, man. You see the jealousy, because these people were jealous of Jake, man. Because we are the light. All these heathen nations teamed up to ultimately take us down, man. It's in the scriptures that ultimately the heathen shall have jealousy of us, man. And I witnessed this today. This Moabite, I can basically sense and comprehend the jealousy that he ultimately has for me, man. Because I'm a Jake, because I'm an Israelite. Darkness is going to hate light, man. All right. Now, let's go to the book of 2nd Esdras, chapter 2 and verse 27. 2nd Esdras, chapter 2 and verse 27, and it reads, Be not weary, for when the day of trouble and heaviness cometh, others shall weep and be sorrowful, and thou shalt be merry and have abundance, man. So ultimately, us, the righteous, in the day of trouble, man, and heaviness cometh, others are going to weep and be sorrowful, but ultimately we're going to be merry and have abundance, man. In verse 28, which is straight to the point. Verse 28, and it reads, The heathen shall envy thee, but they shall be able to do nothing against thee, saith the Lord, man. So ultimately, man, the heathen shall envy thee, man. The heathen, is ultimately gonna envy us, man. But at the end of the day, they're not gonna be able to do anything against us, man. Thus saith the Lord. In verse 29, My hand shall cover thee, so that thy children shall not see hell, man. So ultimately, man, the heathen, all these heathen nations are ultimately gonna envy us, man. And I'm gonna show why, man, because they actually teamed up to ultimately take us down as a nation, man. And let's go into that, man. This is very important. This Psalms 83, this chapter should ultimately be imprinted in your mind, man, because this ultimately reveals to you who your enemies are, man. And you got a question. You ever have the question, who are your enemies? This is what the scripture says, man. Like this, the book of Psalms, chapter 83, verse 1, and it reads, Keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head, man. So ultimately, it said, "For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, make a tumult." A tumult meaning that, they basically, got together in one accord, man. They basically, made a group, and they that hate thee have lifted up thy head, so ultimately they hated us. They that hate thee are representing the heathen, man. In verse 3, they have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. So these people, man, these heathen nations, heathen meaning, not pertaining to Israel, man. So every other nation that's not Israel, man, is a heathen, man, according to the scriptures. And they have taken crafty counsel against that people, meaning that they got into a council, meaning a meeting. They group together, and crafty meaning something that's deceptive, man. Something that's very deceptive. So they got into a deceptive a meeting against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones, man. So ultimately, they grouped up on one accord. For what reason? We're gonna read it in verse 4. They have said, "Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, and that the name of Israel may be no more remembrance," man. So they basically grouped up to ultimately cut us off from being a nation, that the name of Israel should be no more in remembrance. And they did ultimately this because they ultimately are jealous of us, man. They envy us, man, because we are the light, we are the chosen, man. And the chosen are always gonna receive hate and envy, man. Always remember that, man. We are the light of the earth, man. So ultimately these people are gonna, be jealous of us, man. This world cannot function without us, man. We are the salt, man. We are the flavor of this world, man. So ultimately these people are gonna envy us, man. But they're not gonna be able to do nothing, man. And we're gonna see who's our enemies, man. It's gonna list them. For they have verse 5. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. In verse 6, these are gonna be your enemies, man. The tabernacles of Edom. Edom representing the so-called white people. That's the main person, man, because ultimately that's the main person who ultimately, wanted to take us down, which is Esau, because Esau wanted revenge for his birthright. Apparently his birthright being stolen, but ultimately his birthright wasn't stolen. It was ultimately predestinated that Jacob, would ultimately, receive the blessing, man. Receive the eternal blessing. Because in the scripture said, man, that ultimately, the elder shall serve the younger, man. But we'll get into that another time. And continuing on the verse, and the Ishmaelites representing the Arabs, the so-called Arabs, the Middle Easterns, and of Moab. Who? Moab, which are the so-called Asians, man. Moab, man, and the Hagarnes, man. So how come, the one of the main enemies is Moab, man? How come that, man? So ultimately, you gotta have that in consideration that ultimately these Moabites are our enemies too, man. Of course, Esau is the main one, but we can't forget the other enemies too, man. You gotta be aware of all your enemies, man. Spider-Man knows that his main enemy is ultimately Green Goblin, but you ultimately have to consider the other enemies too, man. So ultimately, man, these Moabites, will be judged. These Moabites are our enemies, and these Moabites are ultimately going to go into slavery and ultimately pay for all the horrific, heinous crimes they have committed, man. You know, whether it be giving Jake, defiled food, whether hating on Jake, or whether it be Moab, joining hand to hand with the wicked, which is Esau, Edom, man. So with that, Lord willing, gratified to give all praise and glory to Yahweh Bashim Oshai, Bashim Kakadash. Judgment is coming to Moab. Shalom, Akim, stay up. Death to America. Abba, Shalom.